Hello everybody, and welcome to a very exciting camera manual today for the Rollei 35. So yes, I have used this camera, and here are some photos that I've taken with this exact camera to show you what it can do. The Rollei 35 is a 35mm viewfinder camera. It has a CDS light meter cell, a leaf shutter with shutter speeds of 1/2 to 1/500th of a second, and bulb. The flash sync on this camera is at any speed. And it is one of the smallest 35mm cameras ever made, and for a long time it was the smallest. Also, apparently, DHW Phototechnic still makes these new in limited runs. Their website didn't indicate how to buy one, but I suppose if you can afford one of these new, then you aren't looking at the camera's maker's website to try to figure out how to buy one. For the camera's history, the target market on this would have been wealthy viewfinder users, travel photographers, vacationers, and so forth. It is a very good camera, but it is also, or at the time it was also, much more expensive than comparable and equal cameras, as well as many, frankly, better cameras. It is wonderfully well made. It is very reliable. This camera model specifically could have been made either in Germany or Singapore, and if you look on the back of your camera, it will tell you whether it was made in Germany by Rollei or made in Singapore. There is some argument as to whether or not the performance of the two cameras, German or Singaporean, varies. Most of the people who have tested the two different models can't perceive any difference, so I would argue that in terms of performance, they are probably the same. There are some cosmetic and material finish differences that may exist between the German and Singapore versions. And at minimum, the versions that are made in Germany like this one are perceived as better and are generally more valuable on the collection and resale market. The Singapore versions are considered good carry-around lenses for use and abuse. So for this model camera, it was produced by Rollei, or Rollei. Honestly, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, because I've only ever read the name out in books and so forth. It's not a name I don't think I've ever heard pronounced out loud. So, at any rate, for those of you who don't like my pronunciation of Rollei, I'm sorry. They were made in Germany or Singapore from 1966 to 1974 for the production run of the vintage Rollei 35s. It was preceded by nothing, as this was the first of the Rollei 35s, and it was followed by multiple other 35 models, immediately by the T and the S. So as we do, let's go over the camera's features. We're going to start here on the top. Technically over here on the side, this is your hand strap connection. We'll see that in sharper relief when we look at the sides. But here's the top of the camera. This is your film advance lever right here. This is your light meter reading window. This is your lens collapse release button. So if you notice, the lens here is out and will not go in until I push that button. And now I can collapse it into the camera. And this is your shutter button right here. There we go. On the front of the camera, we have your light meter window. This is where the light meter sits and where it reads the window from. Here we have the make and model. This is your viewfinder window over here. This is your aperture dial, on the outside here. When the whole thing spins, you're adjusting the aperture. Then we have your ASA and DIN dial here, which you can adjust with these two nubs on the sides of it. And when you adjust this, you're setting your ASA or DIN to a different number. Now, quick note, ASA is exactly the same as ISO. ASA is the American Standards Association. ISO is the International Organization for Standards. So if you have a 100 ISO film, then you would set your ASA to 100, and you would get proper meter readings. On the bottom, this is the release to allow you to adjust your aperture. So if you want to set your aperture, you simply push up on that, and now you can change your aperture setting. And your aperture number is here on the top of that dial, and there's a little triangle. That's your index to show you what the aperture is. Here's your lens. This is your lens focus ring right here on the front. And on the top, you can see your focus point. This is infinity to as close as 3 feet. And then on the bottom, you can see it in meters down here. If this camera was bought in a different market, say the EU or Asia, in all probability, meters and feet would be reversed. And I believe there's a way to do it on these cameras, but I don't know how. On the side, we can see Comper because that's who made the shutter for these cameras. Over here, we have the shutter speed dial as well as your film type indicator. So negative would be for black and white negative. Color negative would be for C41. Color would be for, you can see there color and then light bulb. That's for tungsten balanced films. And then color with a sun is for daylight balanced films. And those would be for slide films primarily. Slide films today are all daylight balanced. So if you're going to use a slide film, all you have to do is just set this over here to your color daylight, and then, or whatever other type of film you're using, like that, just to remind you what's in the camera. And then this outside ring is your shutter speed dial. And then on the top, again, you can see what your actual shutter speed is with a triangle to give you the index for the shutter speed. On the camera's back, we have the viewfinder window, the film rewind release, the serial number, and the location of manufacturing. On the side here, we have the wrist strap connection point right there. On this side, nothing. On the bottom, quite bizarrely, we have your flash hot shoe right here. We have the film back lock release. That's this switch right here, which we'll see in just a second when we go to open up the camera. Frame count window, tripod socket, film advance lever right here. To open up the camera, we swing this outward, and now we can take the entire bottom of the camera off of the camera. Inside the camera, we have the film pressure plate right here. We have the film cassette chamber. These silver guide rails help keep the film flat when it passes between the pressure plate and the shutter opening so that you get properly focused photos. Film take-up spool right here. And there's a little film tension sprocket right here where it comes off of. Here you go, you can probably see that spinning. The shutter opening. And then here you can see it uses a PX13 battery right in there. This is your battery chamber. We'll get into that in just a little bit. So the first thing that we're going to do while we have this open is we're going to talk about changing the battery because we're going to need that to run the light meter. All right, let's get some more light in here. Now we can see into the battery chamber a little bit better. So it uses a PX625 battery. However, when this was built, those were mercury batteries with 1.35 volts. That is not the correct battery today. So what you need, there are a couple of different options. We'll go over them. But what we're going to do is we're going to unscrew this just like this. I'm just going to use my fingernails because this can come undone very easily. If yours hasn't been removed in a long time, you might need something like a dime to get that unscrewed. Okay. Now, as you can see, I have a voltage adapting battery adapter in there with a modern LR44 battery. And this is an option that will work just fine. Note that these are kind of spendy. If you lose them, they're a little bit expensive. A somewhat cheaper option that will work just as well is to use a very simple brass adapter. And then these are 675 hearing aid batteries. Right? So what you would do is you would just take the sticky part of this off, put it into the brass adapter, and then this option will give you a proper meter reading, and it will be less expensive compared to getting one of these voltage adapting adapters. It is possible to modify the circuitry in here potentially. This is a very compact and dense camera inside, so whether or not it's easy to do, I don't know. I wouldn't bother, honestly, going to the effort of getting the circuitry modified on this. I would either use a voltage adapting adapter with a 76 type or 357 battery, or just get a brass dumb adapter and use 675s. Okay, all that said, we're going to put the battery back into the chamber here, just like that. And oh, by the way, if you use modern PX625 batteries that have a 1.5 volt voltage, they will underexpose all of your images by about 2 stops. So you can use those and just adjust your ISO to compensate, but honestly, if you're using one of these, you can just spring for whichever adapter you want to get and the batteries that you want to use accordingly. So next thing we're going to do is get that battery in, and we're going to screw this until it's nice and tight. There we go. That works. And that's how we change the battery. All the battery does in this camera is operate the light meter. So if your light meter is dead, you don't even need a battery. Just put the battery cover in there and just use a light meter in your hand or the Sunny 16 roll. All right, so also while we have the back open, let's talk about how to load film in this camera. This camera will take any 35mm film, and given that it has a 1/500th of a second shutter speed, it can use, in full sun, something up to 400 ISO. However, the faster the film, the more limited you're going to be in your aperture. So really, this camera is ideal with something like a 100 ISO film. We're just going to take the new roll of film and we're going to slide it into the cassette chamber over here, and we're going to pull out a bit of a leader, just like that, and I'm going to trigger the shutter. I already have. Thought I had. Oops, pushed the wrong button. We're going to trigger the shutter. Now we can start advancing it. I'm going to slide the leader in where those 3 arrows are, and now it's going to start taking itself up, just like that. All right, did that on the first try. I'm going to close the film pressure plate at this point. I'm going to put the back of the camera on here, if I can figure out how to do that. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. There we go. Got to slide it up all the way from the bottom. Now that we have that seated, we're going to lock it in place, and we're good to go. We are now on start. So what we need to do is put our finger on the shutter button, advance, and we're going to advance a second time. Now, if you look at your camera, you'll notice there's a little triangle right at the what you're seeing is the bottom of that the middle of that window. So what you're going to do is you're going to advance until that little tiny triangle aligns with the number 1. And now that we're there, we're ready to start shooting. So as you shoot, as you take pictures throughout the day, that number is going to increase. This camera does not like being advanced when it's upside down. Okay. So, anything I'm going to show you, I'm going to have to flip this over. Just learned that. Okay, so now as you can see, we've taken a few photos, and now we're at photo number 3. So, you're going throughout your day, taking your photos. All right, and so let's say that we've gone through the whole day, and we're at the end of our roll. Okay. In order to rewind the film, what we got to do, here's the rewind dial. We flip the rewind up, and this physically prevents the advance arm from being used. And now we flip out the rewind lever, and we can just start rewinding. Normally, this is the part where I tell you film is one and done. Don't open the film back because you'll erase everything. If you're using this camera, you probably know that. And I also demonstrate how the film moves through the camera. However, because the film rewind lever is on the removable part of the camera, I can't really show you the film being moved through the camera in practice for this camera. Now, in real life, what you want to do is rewind the film all the way back into the camera. But I want to show you when you advance the film, what you're doing is you're taking it through the camera like this. It's being taken up by the film take-up spool. And then when you rewind the film, it's just being pulled back through the camera and into the cassette. And so basically, as you pull film out of the cassette in front of the shutter opening, that's how the photo is taken with this camera. Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about with the Rollei 35 is how to use a flash, because this camera can use a flash. Now, there is only one way to connect the flash. That is with the flash hot shoe on the bottom of the camera. So, kind of a wonky position for a flash. Now, if you use a flash like this. Now, if you've ever seen like a film noir movie, when they have the villain on screen, they generally in the old film noir movies lit the villain from below. When you think about how we see everything, lit by the sun above us, by the lights in our homes or in the street above us at night, the lights in the street, everything that we see that we consider naturally illuminated is lit from above. So lighting something from below with a flash like this is going to make it look very unnatural. So there are two things you can do to prevent that. One is you can shoot all of your portraits in portrait orientation, which will put the flash off to the side, which is preferable to below. If you have an articulating flash, you can bounce it off of a wall. Actually, even better would be to put it a little bit up like this. The other thing you could do is if you get a flash that has a rotating head, then if you're using portrait orientation, you can also bounce it off of the ceiling like this, and that works very well also. Alternatively, if you get a hot shoe cable adapter, you can plug the adapter here to the hot shoe and run it out to your flash, and now you can hold your flash off your camera. So some basic technique is you want to bounce your flash off the ceiling if you're indoors. That's going to give you the most natural looking lighting in your flash photos, or off a wall if there's no ceiling above you, or it's very high above you, or if it's not painted white. So that will you have the ability to do that either shooting in portrait orientation like this, or by having the flash off the camera where you can angle the flash to bounce the light wherever you need it to give you the best results. So to take a photo with the camera, what we're going to need to do first up is we're going to need to take a light meter reading. Here's your meter window. Now you can see if I put my thumb over the CDS cell that the needle moves, and that's because the meter is always on as long as you have a battery in this camera and the meter window is not covered. If you don't have a case for this camera, what you want to do is grab a little piece of tin foil and some masking tape or frog tape, painter's tape, whatever, a thin little strip, and just cover it, the meter window, and then put a tab in that so you can pull it back and open and close it whenever you want to take a meter reading, just to preserve your battery. If we put a bright light here in front of the meter window, now you can see, there we go, you can see it moving. Let's pretend that the meter needle is right in the middle of the window, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the shutter speed like this, or the aperture, and when we adjust both of them, that orange needle moves. What you want to do is line up the white needle with the orange needle. So if the white needle is vertical right in the middle, then we can assume or pretend that they are now properly aligned, okay? And that the white needle is in the orange circle. Let's see if I can show you exactly what that looks like in reality. There we go. So right there is what it looks like when you have a properly adjusted exposure for your lighting. Okay, just like that. So let's assume that we're out and f8 and 1/125th of a second are our proper shutter and aperture selections to get a proper exposure with our selected film. Now, one other thing, if you notice here, I'm going to adjust my film speed. And you can see as I adjust my film speed, that changes the position of the meter needle, like that. So the film speed, the aperture, and the shutter speed are combined to give you a proper exposure. Okay, so we've got our settings dialed in. They are correct. Now what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what our focus point is. If we're just taking a picture of a landscape, then we know that that's infinity. That's fine. Take our picture, advance, and we're ready to take our next photo. Okay. Great, we've just taken a picture. And then to line up your photo, all you do is look through the back of the camera here through the viewfinder window, and that you just compose your image as you want it to be, and you take your photo. So that is the photo taking in its most basic sense. I'm going to show you how to do hyperfocal and zone focusing with this camera so that you can get more out of your images. So you see here that there are these numbers on top of the lens. Scoot this back to make it easier to see. And they go from a dot and a dot past the 16 down to that triangle. So that triangle is your focus point. And basically what you know is whatever is at that triangle is what is at sharpest focus. So if you know that your subject is 6 feet away, then you line up that triangle with the 6, and that's how you focus this lens. All right, so let's say you're out and you see a really nice vista and it's really sunny, so you can shoot at f/16 and whatever shutter speed you need to use with your film. Let's say it's 1/125th of a second. And you want to get everything possible in focus. If you set your infinity focus to f/16, then right here, that 16 is the same as your f/16. Everything from 16 to 16 will be in focus. So everything from, let's call that 6 feet and 3 inches to infinity will be in focus. If you stop down to f/22, then everything from that dot to that dot, which is about 5.5 feet through infinity, would then be in focus. Okay, but you're shooting a portrait inside, and you need f4. Let's go with f5.6. That's a little bit easier to read. You're inside, you're using f5.6, okay, and now we have a proper meter reading. What you want to do is figure out how far away your portrait subject is, or whatever you're photographing. If you know that they are 4 feet away, okay. Now, let's take a look at these 2 dots between the triangle and the arrows. Those stand for f4 and f5.6. Everything from those 2 outer dots will be in focus. So at f5.6, everything from about 3 feet 10 inches to 4 feet and 6 inches will be in focus. That's how you read that. If we were outside taking this exact same photo and we set it to f/16, everything from 3 feet to just beyond, to 6 feet rather, would now be in focus. So what this scale does is tell you what's going to be in focus based on your aperture and your selected focus point. So hyperfocal distance would be the maximum that you can have in focus, and your zone focusing would be, say, if you're at f/16 and 6 feet, everything from 20 feet to 4 feet would be in focus. So, or here you can see again, at f8, everything from infinity down to as close as 10 feet would be in focus. So that's how you read this. The zone focusing, the red numbers 20 and 6 are for close and distant zone focusing. It was something that was much more important back in the days of peak viewfinder use than it is today. So that's how you take a photo with this camera and understand everything on the lens that's trying to tell you. Double exposures? Can't do it. Double exposure prevention is built into this camera. And you know what? That's everything I've got for you today on this camera. Thank you everyone for watching. If this video was helpful and useful to you, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track and that I'm producing and creating content which is helpful to you. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about responding every couple of days and answering whatever questions you have to the best of my ability. If you'd like to subscribe to find out when I have more videos about how to use cameras, photographic techniques, or the best practices for the tools of the trade, by all means please subscribe and check that notifications bell to be alerted when new content arrives. And one last thing, thank you everyone very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos. Won't we, Steinbeck? What's that look about?